Welcome to another video. So today's video, I'm going to tell you a lot about my encounters I've had over the years with big cats. Now before I tell you about my encounters, let's do some facts. Big cats were roaming the British countryside. We had the lynx, we also had wolves, and we also had bears. And then years ago you could go to Harrods and you could buy a cheetah, you could buy a leopard, and then they brought in the Dangerous Animal Act, which meant you had to have a licence and proper enclosure to keep your big cats. Now, not many people bothered to do that. Therefore, the ones who didn't just turned their big cats into the wild. So there has been numerous sightings for many years of big cats in Britain, and it's not like another cryptid animal that you think, you know, things like Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. Big cats do exist, they are real animals. So what I'm going to do is just tell you a lot about my encounters. So encounter number one, and to be honest, what a lovely place to be telling you about my big cat encounters when we're in the middle of the woods. So yeah, the first time I ever saw a big cat, this was probably about 19 years ago. I was coming back from a night's lamping with a friend. He brought a new gun, he wanted to try it out, so I didn't take mine. So end of the night, packed everything away, I dropped him off at home, and then coming from his village towards mine, there was your proper country back roads, bendy, windy, and all of that. And I come around this tight bend, and this is probably 11:45 at night. There was a cat. It obviously already come out of the hedge. I come around the corner, it was sat in the middle of the road. And I put my brakes on, had my high beams on, and I thought, wow, what do I do here? And I was no more than 10 foot away from it. Had my car engine running, and it sat looking at me, and it was twitching its tail. And back then, didn't really have smartphones or cameras or social media or anything like that. And what seemed to be an eternity was probably only 5-10 seconds, and it stood up and it took 2 steps and then bounded over a 5-bar gate and also disappeared. So I got home, I actually woke my dad up and I told him, and he says, well, what do you want me to do about it? It was just more the shock. But that was, yeah, the closest I've ever been to a big cat. And people said, well, you know, it wouldn't have sat there for that long. Well, it seemed like an eternity, but it wasn't. It was seconds, really. But it was enough for me to make everything out because my high beams were on it, and I was very close to it. So, encounter number 2. This was around the town called Towcester. In fact, it was just outside of Towcester. Again, this was probably, what, for about 15 years ago now. I got to know this lady through selling chickens, and after she had a few hens off me, she kept losing her chickens and ducks off a pond. And she had quite a big manor house, and she had a lot of land as well to go with it. So anyway, after a visit round, me and a friend, it was foxes that were doing the damage. So we went round, we dealt with the foxes, and we'd been round there 2 or 3 times doing the lamping for her. And there was always abundant of wildlife when we was out. Obviously we saw the foxes, we saw rabbits, we'd even pick up deer eye shine when they were coming out of the woods. But this one particular night, it was in the summer, because I remember we had to wait a couple of weeks for them to finish all the harvesting, so we could go on the stubbles. So this particular night, we started off like normal, started in the yard, went through the paddock, and that's normally when we'd see all the rabbits, and we didn't see anything. So we carried on driving around the land, and was picking up no eye shine whatsoever. So after about an hour and a half, me and my friend nearly packed in. But this, where we were, was at the top of the land, and was on this big stubble field, because all her fields were massive. They weren't really smaller fields, they were quite big fields. So I was on this stubble field, and my friend put the lamp on one last time, and we picked up some eye shine, which was effectively the next field, but there was a bit of a valley that ran between us and where these eyes were. I says, oh, fox, let's take a drive. So we drove down, and we come down the valley bit. So when we hit the bottom of that field, put the lamp on again, and we could still see them. I says, oh, brilliant. So we swapped. I then was driving and lamping, and my friend, different friend from previous encounter, had my rifle. So we're driving towards his eyes, and he kind of started to move out a little bit, right-handed. So he looked through the scope, and we're probably 200 yards away. So for me, I can still really just see eyes. He looked through the scope and went, that isn't a fox. I says, what is it? He says, that's a big cat. Because then when he said that, when we hit the eyes, when we was in that field, I thought, they are really big and bright. They look like gold nuggets. It weren't like a normal fox's eye shine. And then when he said that, the penny dropped, and I was like, pardon my French, but shit, that's a black cat. And he looked through the scope and he could see it, and then it started to bound left-handed now towards this block of woodland. And I mean bounding, it is like that. You could see the tail at the end of it. It was long, it was black, it was slender. And we've been involved in country sports and the countryside all of our lives, and I know the difference between foxes, badgers, rabbits, hares, daytime and nighttime, the way they move. And he said it's a cat, and then it is heading towards this block of woodland. And she used to have this rough strip outside the woods. It was like for nature basically, and there was a gate in among it, and this was a 5-bar gate. And as it was bounding towards this gate, it leapt straight over and disappeared in the block of wood. So we turned the lamp off, we gave it a few minutes. I gave my fox squeak on my hand. He put the lamp back on, and he picked up some eyes in a tree. Now, everyone knows that foxes don't climb trees, badgers don't climb trees, and it wasn't like it was just off the ground. This was a good height. And he looked for the scope, but from the backdrop, obviously it's pitch black, he couldn't see anything. So we turned tail and went home. Following day, we went back to the same stubble field. We picked up our tracks from the night before, drove straight towards this bounding, the boundary line on the fence. And we had a look in the wood, and you could, where we made out these eye shines were, there was a tree that had scratch marks up it. No other evidence or signs around, but there were scratch marks at the tree. So that was the second encounter. So, my third encounter. This was only summer of last year. I finished work, and I was coming from village to village. And as you know, in summertime, even 10 o'clock at night, it's dark, but it's still fairly light, so you can make things out. And I was coming upon this village. I'm not going to give obviously any names of these locations on the video, but you know, they're all been around Northampton anyway. So I was coming out of one village, I was making my way home, and I come over the brow of the hill, had my 4 beams on, and as I'm dropping down the hill, something nipped out of the hedge and then just crossed the road. And I say nipped, it covered from right to left in literally seconds. It wasn't a fox. This bounded along. It wasn't huge, don't get me wrong, but it was long and it was black. And just as it went into the hedge, it happened to look a bit. I caught the eye shine. I always remember from that night lamping, they were big bright eyes. And I remember for reference, it went past an oak tree. And as I was going to work the following day, I left a little bit earlier, stopped my car, and had a look at this oak tree. And it was what I would describe probably Labrador, if not a little bit bigger than a Labrador height to the shoulder where it went across. Now, people would say, oh, it's a fox. It wasn't, because like I said, foxes at night and with your light, you can make out the tip of a tail, the white of the bib, the way they move. This wasn't. It was black. It was solid, and it didn't hesitate to cross that road so quick. So that was more of a glimpse, but it was a long enough glimpse to identify what it was. So they're my 3 main encounters I've had with black cats in the UK. And it's like I said, I've been out and involved with countryside all my life. I mean, I'm out in the woods now, and the dog's never reacted in this particular wood, but you know, there's times where I've been trying to get the dog to go some cover for training, or all of a sudden she's stopped, had a bit of a growl and not wanting to go somewhere. Not saying it's a black cat hunkered up somewhere, but because she's a working dog, she's used to all kind of scents, and she's pretty good at scent trailing. And just my personal belief, I think that could be something she's picked up and think, nope, I'm not going after that. Could be a big cat, could be something completely different. But we're going to continue our walk now, me and the dog. But I hope you have found this little video interesting on just my encounters over the years with black cats.